Οκ. Ξεκίνησε
Ωραία.
από μένα, Μάρα.
Ωραία. Αγαπητές και αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητές και αγαπητοί φίλοι του κλάδου Γνωστική Ψυχολογίας της Ελληνικής Ψυχολογικής Εταιρείας, καλησπέρα σας. Και σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που είστε απόψε κοντά μας. Καλή ακαδημαϊκή, καλή σχολική χρονιά σε όλους τους εκπαιδευτικούς. Απόψε έχουμε την πολύ μεγάλη χαρά να έχουμε μαζί μας την καθηγήτρια Αγγελική Νικολοπούλου, η οποία είναι συνδεδεμένη αυτή τη στιγμή στη τηλεδιάσκεψη από την ανατολική ακτή των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών. Είναι μεσημέρι εκεί. Και θα μας παρουσιάσει συνοπτικά κάποια από τα ευρήματα των ερευνών της που αφορούν, όπως λέει και ο τίτλος, σε παρεμβάσεις σε παιδιά προσχολικής ηλικίας που βασίζονται σε αφηγήματα και στο παιχνίδι και στοχεύουν στην ενδυνάμωση του προφορικού λόγου των παιδιών, των δεξιοτήτων γραμματισμού και των κοινωνικών τους δεξιοτήτων. Κυρία Νικολοπούλου, καλώς ορίσατε στη συντροφιά του Κλάδου Γνωστικής Ψυχολογίας. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που δεχτήκατε την πρότασή μας, την πρόσκλησή μας. Πολύ σύντομα και για λόγους προγραμματισμού να ενημερώσω ότι η παρουσίαση θα κρατήσει περίπου 45 λεπτά και στη συνέχεια θα έχουμε χρόνο για να διατυπώσουμε ερωτήματα στην κυρία Νικολοπούλου και να συζητήσουμε ανοιχτά για όλες τις σκέψεις που μπορεί να μας γεννήσει η παρουσίασή της. Να πω επίσης ότι η κυρία Νικολοπούλου θα κάνει την παρουσίασή της στα αγγλικά, καθαρά για λόγους άνεσης και εξοικείωσης με τη σχετική επιστημονική ορολογία. Ωστόσο, η συζήτηση και οι ερωτήσεις που θα θέσουμε στη συνέχεια μπορούν να είναι είτε στην ελληνική είτε στην αγγλική γλώσσα, ό,τι είναι ευκολότερο στον καθένα και στην κάθε μία. Χωρίς άλλη καθυστέρηση θα δώσω το λόγο στη Νατάσα Κυριακοπούλου για να μας πει 2 λόγια σχετικά με την προσκεκλημένη ομιλήτριά μας, την οποία ανυπομονούμε να ακούσουμε.
Να καλωσορίσω λοιπόν και εγώ όλους εσάς και την Αγγελική Νικολοπούλου, η οποία είναι ομότιμη καθηγήτρια και διευθύντρια του Narrative Development Laboratory του Τμήματος Ψυχολογίας στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Lehigh. Η Αγγελική Νικολοπούλου έλαβε το διδακτορικό της δίπλωμα στην αναπτυξιακή ψυχολογία από το Πανεπιστήμιο της Καλιφόρνιας στο Berkeley. Έκτοτε έχει αναλάβει ερευνητικά καθήκοντα στο City University της Νέας Υόρκης και στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Καλιφόρνιας στο Σαν Διέγκο και έχει διδάξει στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Καλιφόρνιας Σαν Διέγκο, στο Smith College και από το 1996 στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Lehigh. Στο επίκεντρο του ερευνητικού της έργου βρίσκεται η ανάπτυξη της παραγωγής και της κατανόησης αφηγημάτων, η αναπτυξιακή ρόλη του αφηγήματος και του παιχνιδιού, η κοινωνική νόηση, η διαμόρφωση ταυτότητας, η ομάδα συνομιλίκων ως μήτρα μάθησης και ανάπτυξης, η αλληλεπίδραση του γραμματισμού και του προφορικού λόγου και η ανάλυση παιδικών βιβλίων. Στα μαθήματά της αναφέρεται στις κοινωνικοπολιτισμικές προεκτάσεις στην αναπτυξιακή ψυχολογία, επισημαίνοντας τον κρίσιμο ρόλο που διαδραματίζουν η γλώσσα, οι γλωσσικές αλληλεπιδράσεις στον προσδιορισμό της ταυτότητας των παιδιών και στη διαμόρφωση της ακαδημαϊκής εξέλιξής τους. Οπότε δίνουμε το λόγο στην Αγγελική Νικολοπούλου να μας πει όλα αυτά τα ενδιαφέροντα που θα ακούσουμε τώρα.
Λοιπόν, ευχαριστώ πολύ που με καλέσατε. Συγγνώμη όμως, τα ελληνικά μου δεν είναι τόσο πολύ καλά, οπότε όπως είπε η Νατάσα, θα δώσω την ομιλία στα αγγλικά, γιατί ήρθα στην Αμερική για σπουδές και ποτέ δεν έχω διδάξει στα ελληνικά, ούτε έχω την ορολογία στα ελληνικά. Λοιπόν, move on. Okay. What I want to talk about today is one aspect of my own work, which focuses on a intervention in order to promote, as my title says, to promote, this, what do we call here? See, sometimes when I talk Greek and then English, then I can't talk either language, okay? So this intervention is a narrative and place-based activity, and it promotes school readiness, so that's what we're trying to figure out. I'm going to talk a little bit, give you some of the introduction, that kind of what's its importance, why are we interested in narrative, and I combine them with play elements. I will talk of the larger evaluation project that we did, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to talk a little bit more of a case study, and I will end with implications for interventions and how we want to integrate their narratives. As Natasha mentioned, I'm a developmental psychologist by training, but as I will explain, I got interested in this intervention, and I will explain why that's the case. Okay. As we all know, and I think that's also true throughout, there is an increased interest in early childhood education. We see that in every international organization, and that has been the case because there has been a wide-ranging scholarly research coming from cognitive psychology, developmental neuroscience, and so on, that we have been understanding young kids better, and we are figuring out they're eager to learn. There is a lot of potential that they have. On the other hand, we also have recognized that that's a critical period. So that has been an interest exactly in early childhood education, and in particular for us to prevent reading difficulties, since we know that when we intervene later on, we are not really able to do very much, but if we intervene earlier on, seems to make much more of a difference. That's particularly true for kids who come from low-income backgrounds. This kind of trend of early childhood education has brought, particularly in the US, movements of standards and accountability, because education in the US is state-wise, is not federally funded. There is all movement to create much more standards and accountability and how our kids are doing, which had brought, the end result has been an emphasis then to start even early on for us to go to more didactic and academic approaches, which has brought together a whole de-emphasis of child-centered, play-oriented, and constructive approaches. So in a way, kids are given, different, almost we're making preschool-like school rather than allowing to be preschool, where we are actually helping the kids learn in the way that's significant for them. Okay. On the other hand, the academic community has begun to try to recognize and bring out that we should not be looking at didactic and academic approaches versus play-based approaches as being a dichotomy. That's really a false dichotomy. And there has been movement to combine both of those. So for example, there was an interesting conference that looked at play, talking about it as learning, and playful learning has become one of the ways that a lot of the early childhood class curricula in the US has been going. There is also an interest, what is called Tools of the Mind curriculum, that's actually based in the Vygotskian theory of play, with some of the work that I will talk about seems to be, is related. Okay. So how can we do this? How can we combine then these didactic academic approaches with play? One approach is, that people have been using sometimes to alternate between them, but I would say that's inadequate in a way. What we need to do is much more systematically try to integrate the play element in the educational practices, and in a way try to draw on principles of play to create activities that would allow the kids, that draws on their enthusiasm, draws on their interest, and allows them to learn and development. So using the play elements in order for kids to learn. That's kind of where the intervention that I would talk about, that I call the storytelling, story acting activity, STSA for short, is an example of such an activity. As I will explain, it integrates the play element in educational practices by combining narrative and play elements. So what I want to do next is to actually talk of the significance of each of these elements. Why are we interested in narrative? Why are we interested in play? Okay. So just to remind us, when we talk of narratives, we're talking of the child telling, or an adult retelling a story or telling a story about things that happened to them. Could be an experience that something happened. The child is asked, what happened? We went to the park. What happened to the park? What did you see in the zoo? And so on. But also it's about imagined events. That could be, that kind of a book that they read, that they recounted. What makes a narrative is that unfolds over time, and it is a coherence, so it's causally related to each other. Those are the aspects that we see in narrative. So therefore, if we really think much more about what does it take, what are the skills that it takes for a child to be able to tell a good story, and for all of us, their cognitive abilities, we need to be able to take the perspective. How you tell a story, you are telling it to someone else. You need to know what exactly you need to incorporate and what not to incorporate. The linguistic abilities in order to be able to relate the events, whether temporally or causally, but also socio-dramatic skills. What we say in some cases versus another. In fact, there is quite a complicated abilities going on when a child tells a story. As I will hope to give you a sense. Okay, so in fact, we have found that quite a wide variety of research is showing that when kids have mastered narrative skills early on during the preschool years, those are the kids who do much better as they come to learn how to read and write and their later reading abilities. So the earlier they have had these narrative abilities, the better they are doing academically. Okay? So people have puzzled, why is this the case? And what the answer, someone like Catherine Stoke and Westby have argued that that's because they say narratives and the early narratives is what is called like a way station, someone in between contextualized and decontextualized language skills. And I would go on to explain what those terms really mean. Okay? Yeah. Contextualized language is the language that we use in the here and now. When we're talking to a child, when interacting with them, we're talking, the objects are around us. So the interaction, which is in the here and now, we're talking what's happening, provide cues and support for the child. So the child, let's say in the interaction, and we know that when we're looking at language development of the kids, when they're in the context of adults and others around them, their language looks much more developed than what it might be. That's what we call contextualized language. Decontextualized language is the language in the here and then, in the there and then, which is removed from the interaction. And what we are trying to do is we use language to convey everything, all the information through words. So an example of that is narrative. When I'm telling a story, I'm not referring to the here and now. I'm referring to the there and then, and I need to use all the information for you to understand the story. The same thing is about when we're doing pretemporary or when we're providing explanations of formal definitions. That's kind of what we call decontextualized language. And what's important for us to recognize is that language in the here and now is language of the home, while language in the there and then is language of school. So therefore, the early, when young kids learn and they are able to tell stories early on, that's why it becomes this way station between the language of the home versus the language of the school, because if you think about it, most of the language of the school is the language of the there and then. Okay, that's why we actually think the narrative seems to be quite important when it's provided to the kids early on. Okay, the other element that goes into the activity is play, and in particular here, I'm going to talk about Vygotsky's theory of play, which he argued that, with a famous quotation, I'm sure you have all seen, that play is the source of development, he argues, and creates the zone of proximal development. And in the way Vygotsky conceived of it, that play, he says, is a social symbolic activity that can create a prototype for us to create powerful learning environments. And that's how we are able to combine the two. Let me kind of explain this a little bit more, okay? What are the characteristics of play that Vygotsky talks about? He says that every play situation, whether we're talking of social pretend play, whether we're talking of games with rules, have two characteristics that are interrelated. One of them is the imaginary situation. Every play has an imaginary component. And also there are rules, implicit or explicit, that really constitute and create the imaginary situation. So for example, when a child plays the mother and taking care of the baby, there are rules that the child is following. What is a mother? What does it make them to be a mother? It's not everything that they can do. Okay, mothers take care of babies, let's say, or so they kind of, while they pretend play, social pretend play, we have the imaginary situation. That's what we see when you see the kids are actually presenting and representing this kind of imaginary situation. That's done through a system of rules that they need. In order for them to play with another, they have to play rules. You can see in games with rules, for something like playing chess. Chess in itself, we actually have the imaginary situation has been is more implicit, and what we know is the rules. There are all the rules that in order for you to play. However, there is a story world that's created when they're playing. Those he sees the two characteristics of play, what's the significant for him. Because we have these two characteristics, then we can actually see that it creates that play in a way I seem contradictory. In a way, there is imagination and spontaneity, and on the other hand, this rule-governed action. Okay, but I would say that this kind of contradiction is only apparent. Okay, so how are these put together? Is that play, if we think about it, involves a voluntary acceptance of shared rules. If we don't accept the rules, we cannot play. Okay, if someone, trying to play with someone, if you don't accept it, we can't play. And those are the rules that even the kids impose of themselves early on. That's is the first element of self-regulation. So if we don't accept the rules, we can't play. And because of that, the rules of the play then becomes the first instances of self-constraint and self-determination. So for example, Vygotsky uses a famous example of where the kids are using a cookie in order to play something. I think they were playing, taking tickets to go to the train, and they're using a cookie. Normally, if you leave kids with a cookie, they will eat it. But for hours, they play without eating the cookie because they were playing, okay? Because they had to accept the rules of what it means to actually use it in this play situation, okay? So because then they accept the rules of the game, that means also creating this imaginary situation of the story world, which is constituted by the rules. And while playing then, children are intrinsically motivated to appropriate and master the cultural forms and skills embedded in this activity, okay? So in a way, it's the fusion of the two elements, the imaginary situation, and depending on what we actually create of the imaginary situation and the accepting of rules, that makes play a powerful learning activity, okay? In the intervention I'm talking about, we're combining play and narrative, and maybe you can actually see how the two are actually interrelated. There's affinity and interdependence between play. Whatever I said about play, it's also true of narrative. In order to tell a story, we're accepting a system of rules, those being linguistic, cognitive rules, in order to create a symbolic imagination. That is rule-governed, okay? And also what's important, going to the earlier, what I talked about, they are both complementary forms. Asking a child to tell a story, we're asking them to use decontextualized language, which is actually more difficult for kids. When they're playing in fantasy, that the enactment is the contextualized word. So it is the interplay between these two forms, going from the contextualized to decontextualized, that also provides significance. Okay. Having talked then about the different elements that go into storytelling, what I want to do now is really introduce this activity. Okay. The storytelling, story acting activity was actually something that this teacher, a writer, Vivian Paley, has used in her preschool classroom, a kindergarten classroom, and she worked at the Chicago laboratory schools, and she wrote these beautiful books about it, and that's that's how I was introduced to it, and have been taken in several different parts internationally and also in this country. Okay, the storytelling, story acting activity, as the title indicates, there are two phases. It's the storytelling phase and the story acting phase. The storytelling phase happens earlier in the day when the kids come in during morning time activities. Well, they're called also the free choice activities. There might be a table for them to play with some science or with some literacy materials, whatever. And one of such activities that happen in the classrooms that I work with is that the teacher takes a book and the child can dictate a story to the child can dictate their story to the teacher, who writes it down as the child service with minimal intervention. The kid is not asked to tell a story. The child tells their own story, whatever story it is. They are not given any prompts of what they are doing. They would actually, and when the activity gets established, they're very eager to participate. All the kids participate in this activity, as you'd see. There is also the important aspect. The other aspect is not just the storytelling, and I think it's quite significant that by the end of the day, there is the story acting phase. And that happens during the day. The teacher brings the whole classroom together in a large group time. And then the teacher has the child, and I'll show you a video so you can see that a little bit more. The teacher brings the child next to her, first reads the story that the child says, and then the child who told the story, the child author, chooses the classmates to actually play the different roles in the story. Then the teacher will read the story again. And as you see in the video, there is also a stage that has created. The kids stand outside of the stage, and the teacher reads the story, and now the child author and the children were selected will act out the story. And these are it's a simple activity, but as I hope to illustrate, it's actually a powerful one. Okay, let me say what I have here. Let me just give you a little bit of introduction. The taking down the story is I'm not showing you that. I'm just showing you the end of that. Because as I said, the child comes and dictates their own story, whatever they want, to the teacher, who writes it down. And then the part that we'll see much more here is the acting out of the story. And all that goes with that.
Audience? Yes! Thank you. Once upon a time, Jordan and Bethany and me and Wanye was playing in the room. Then we went to the store to get candy and French toast. Then we went to sleep and my pop-pop waked me up and we did it again. Then Mr. Demetrius made a rainbow. Would you like to be in your story? Would you like to be in your story? You want to see Bethany, Wanye, Pop-Pop, and Mr. Demetrius. So who would you like? Mr. Demetrius, you're in the story. Is that okay? All right, I'll stay right here. You make an entrance at the end. Okay. You're going to be Pop-Pop. Okay. Can you move over so that people can get in and out without stepping on you? Over here, off stage. Now we need somebody to be Jordan. I wish it was Jordan, but it's not. Okay. Sanifa, you're Jordan. Now you can move over by Chantel, so that we have some room. And you, and Bethany. And we will imagine Wanye. Jordan, and Bethany, and me, and Wanye was playing in the room. Then we went to the store to get candy and French toast. Then we went to sleep. And my pop-pop woke me up. And we did it again. And we did it again. Then Mr. Demetrius made a rainbow. Great story. Good job. Okay.
Sorry, I forgot there was a delay between what you heard and what was happening. I should have, because it's embedded on the video, I should have presented it directly. I forgot that. Okay, I think this gives you some sense of what happens in the activity. So let's think a little bit, what makes it special? I think that one of the things that we can actually see that kids, when these activities really take place, kids can take 3 different roles. They can be the teller of the story, as we saw this child. They could be the actors in their own story, but also another, or can be the audience. And that kind of, changes throughout. In most of the classrooms, there will be about 3 or 4 stories per day, or the ones we did twice a week. So the kids have the opportunity to take different roles. As I said, kids are very interested in this activity. And because of the acting, normally if you just have telling stories, I would say that a lot of the girls are the ones who participate. But because we have the acting component, all the kids participate. But what's more, another significant aspect is very often there is book reading in a lot of preschool classrooms. We tend to actually read also to the kids books, but telling stories is not something that happens often. So there, that's the other component. They are telling their stories. You are placing them to kind of, beyond just listening to the books, okay? And, what's important here, and I think we cannot have one component without the other, is what makes it significant is this kind of combining the 2 elements. What are the implications? They're not telling stories to adults after a while, but to their peers, where you are actually hearing, they're creating the common culture in the classroom, they listen to one another. But I should mention, because preschool teachers tend to worry about that if you tell a story, all the kids will actually tell the same story. Well, that doesn't happen. They have to create the ability to listen to what other kids actually saying. It doesn't happen in the preschool that they will imitate one another. As I say, we have this kind of ability, asking them to tell stories is important, but acting out, it's also easier for them, and which they are enjoying. And they're creating a whole shared activity. They're finally, I've looked in different classrooms, they develop a common culture that develops by the end of the year. They have their own kind of themes that interchanging with one another. So they're building a classroom peer culture, becomes a valued activity that they want to participate. Okay, let me tell you how I get involved in evaluating the storytelling, story acting activity. Since, as I mentioned before, I'm a developmental psychology, my interest has been in narrative development, language development, but I was actually was part of this project that I was asked to, with one of my colleagues, that we analyze the stories collected through this activity. And I was presenting in a conference the stories that the kids told. These are preschoolers all the time. So 4-year-olds is the mean age of our kids. And one of the researchers, I was presenting the stories that the kids told, and one of the researchers argued with me saying, this is not a 4-year-old, that's a 7-year-old. You know, and another, that's a 10-year-old, cannot be a 4-year-old. 4-year-olds don't tell these stories. They say, well, I know this is a 4-year-old. I was in a classroom. But it made me realize that this was actually, and these were all middle-class kids, as you can say, okay? But made me realize that actually this activity was promoting the children's language development. And that's what, you know, brought the interest to actually create this as an intervention to promote particularly the language abilities of young kids. But as we actually see, given all the aspects of the activity, there is more that goes on than just language ability. So that's what brought me to actually think of this as an intervention program. Okay, so what I wanted then to now is to look at how I experimentally try to evaluate the storytelling, story acting activity. And in particular, we wanted, as you know, my title also indicated, to kind of put it as a module in a classroom, not necessarily the whole kind of, not to dominate the classroom, and to actually see whether it can promote the 3 components of what we call school readiness, oral language, emergent literacy, and social competence, okay? There has been, of course, previous research on STSA, some of them, as I mentioned before, Haley's ethnographic books that are really wonderful, that she presents the activity, shows how the kids are actually developing. But she was at the Chicago Laboratory School. Most of the kids there would be professors' kids, but also some from other. These are mainly middle class classes with well-developed oral, cognitive, and social abilities. Also, the STSA for Paley was frequent every day and dominated the classroom. That was her curriculum, okay? There was a lot of also acting out adult author children's books. There was a lot of discussion she did. So in a way, that was kind of a context. What she did there, can we actually do it with the kids that come from impoverished backgrounds, okay? My own research, which I have done before, we've looked at some, you know, that the earlier studies that I've also did was looking at one classroom and one control classroom, usually with middle class. You know, I did it with low-income kids. So, and we focused only on oral and language abilities. So the question now is, can we implement it in a larger sort of classrooms, and that we can promote school readiness, language literacy, and social competence? Okay, so what is the research design? This was a project that took place over 2 years because as we couldn't really handle more than 3 experimental classrooms every year. So we had, you know, that, you know, combining the 2 years, we have 6 experimental classrooms and 7 control classrooms. We use pre-tests during the beginning of the year, language literacy, social competence, and I will go a little bit more immediately. And post-test, the same tasks with some variations in May. The activity then took place in the experimental classroom for October to April, and we actually implemented it twice per week. While the control classrooms are the regular classroom activities, okay? So I'll explain a little bit more the measures we use. For language, you use the PPVT, which is a receptive vocabulary. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Is actually you're showing, you're telling the name of something, and the child has to point to that. So say, you know, show with the ball, something. That's a receptive vocabulary. We use that as a baseline activity. Given that STSA is much more about expressing, we were interested in expressive vocabulary. So you're showing a picture and you are asking the kids, say, what is this called? What's another word for it? You know, this lamb, what's another word for it? So it looks like the expressive vocabulary. That's the EVT. We also had designed the narrative task that was telling a story, you know, retelling a story. You tell the child a story, retelling it we saw them sequence of four pictures that they can tell a sequence, and also, or one more complex to tell a story. And we did production and comprehension abilities. For literacy, we used the Pulse PK, which focuses on beginning sound awareness, rhyming awareness, and printed word awareness. Social competence, we used pretend abilities. So the child, whether the child can imitate, you say, brush your teeth or brush the teeth of the doll. So it's self-other directed activities, or asking them without anything to actually cut a paper. How would you cut a paper? So the child is imagining, peer play interaction, we were interested in self-regulation. We took, these are measures that usually are given to teachers to fill out for each child, but we turned them into observations. We actually did 2-3 minutes observation, taking the elements from the standardized test. So the researcher wrote down exactly what the child did for, in areas that we were looking, what the child did, wrote it down, and then you looked what are the activities that were going on. That would allow us to actually take from all the kids. We did that, the same thing, turning standardized tests that teachers give to more observations that researchers were able to do. And the kind of components that these tests had for the play is disruptions, connection, interaction, while self-regulation was self-inhibition and self-assertion. Okay. The research side, then there was a childcare classroom from low income in a middle-sized town in the Northeast near my university. And as kind of, gives you a sense that Head Start eligible means in the US language, low-income kids who get federal funding, okay? We had in the classrooms that were 62%, there are classrooms that are what we call Head Start classrooms, all of them being low income, but there are also ones that there is a combination of different. The rest of them were from working class families, so you couldn't really tell which one. And there were diverse classrooms. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is compare the experimental and control classrooms along the elements that we tested them. We can see that, just looking at the experimental classrooms, the activity we were able to actually have it twice a week. We were able to do it with more intensity the second year. So we have, 325 stories that were collected. So kids told about 8 stories on average over the year. In the second year, 5 in the previous year. Okay. When we look at experimental approach, here I'm putting in a way the elements that from the pre and post test that were significant. So we actually, narrative comprehension was significant. So the kids in the experimental classroom did better than kids in the control classroom across the year. Okay, printed word awareness, inhibition, assertion, and play disruption were the main elements. Okay, here the analysis we did, which I'm not going to go, is really a hierarchical linear model because we have kids nested in classrooms and all that kind of stuff. This is a more detailed kind of exactly what happened. We're interested in this, and you actually see the red that, so I'm not going to go into detail in that. You get a sense of that we did find some difference between experimental and controlled classrooms. And one of the things that happened is that the kids did better, if you remember, narrative comprehension, but there were no differences in their expressive vocabulary test. One time when I was presenting that in the preschools that I work with, the teacher said, but you have to look at the kids' own stories and see whether they are developing, and that's what I'm turning to look at comparison now within the experimental group, because if you remember, we went from it's through the whole year, so we can see how they are developing. So I want to show you some example of the child. This is a young child, he's 4, and this is his first story. He says, I eat hot dogs and I eat macaroni and cheese too. I remember what I eat. I eat chicken noodle soup and I eat chicken. My mom has fish nuggets, so I eat fish nuggets too. Okay, I'm done. You can actually see this is a simple story. It's about their personal experiences. This we call the I stories. Normally, if you think about it, stories are supposed to be in the third person and they're in the past. This is all in the present, okay? So this is kind of very simple. He's retelling something, whether it really happens, Okay. Let's look at now after, towards the end of the year, 11 stories in between, we can begin to see much more of a narrative. The child says, once upon a time, there was red Power Rangers, and then there was a blue Power Ranger, and then they killed the monsters. And then the Power Rangers changed back into people. There was a yellow Power Ranger too, and the yellow Power Ranger was a girl, and there was a white Power Ranger. And they changed back too, and then they ate food, and they went out to see if there were monsters outside, and they were. So they changed back to the Power Rangers, and then the Power Rangers fight with them, and they were done. The end. In every classroom you have whatever is a dominant theme, see this classroom, Power Rangers were the theme. So if we go a little bit more, you can actually see, you can ask, begin the story with once upon a time, end it. And if we look, we can see the little events that the child is doing. And what I have in red is introducing the dramatic problem. So I'm doing it, in our, there is a lot of improvement that can happen, but you can see there was quite, this is all in the third person and it's in the past. So we can actually see a narrative. So now what I'm going to show you is all the kids in the intervention. I'll compare their first and their last story. 4 kids who told at least 5 stories in between, okay? And we looked at them in terms of the percentage of the stories, the length of the stories, narrative, clauses, and so forth. So we actually see that throughout, if we look from the beginning of the year to the end, first story to the last story, we can actually see that their length increased, the number of narrative clauses, by narrative clauses mean clauses in the past tense, the number of characters they included, but also active characters, not characters that they gave them actions, not just characters that they bring them, they don't give them any action. They also increase in temporality. They were able to create a story in temporal sense, but not yet in causal in any way. There was a shift between the first person, third person narrative, and so forth, okay? So we actually see that their stories increase. So now what I want to go on is, want to see, we actually said that there were outcome, that kids in the experimental classroom increase more than the control classrooms. And here I'm going to look whether we can predict the spring outcome scores for the number of stories that each child told, okay? And here are all the measures that we have, and you can actually see that similar to what I mentioned before, we can see that it seems that is the number of stories that they told that predicts their outcome measures. And they seem to be similar enough to what we found through the HLM analysis. That's more detail. Okay, so to summarize the results, is we can actually see that our hypothesis was supported in terms of language abilities, emergent literacy, print awareness, beginning sound awareness, social competence, several components with the social competence, but we did not support it in some of the other measures, okay? Expressive vocabulary, I think the kids probably needed to have a lot more in these classrooms than we were, because there was not a lot of book reading. There was not a lot of language. There were actually not a very strong curriculum. So, and I think that needs to be combined. The others are not so significant, I would say. And I think we can conclude that this SDSA can be used as a school readiness module to promote an interrelated set of school readiness. And And also the opportunity of telling many stories is critical, as the second analysis indicated. Let me go. I think we have a bit of time. I want to go a little bit more into detail by looking at a case study to kind of give you a bit more of a sense. Why does storytelling, story acting really is an important activity, and how the kids really get into it. So I will talk of a child called Destiny. This is a pseudonym. And she was a very disruptive child. When we went to that classroom, I mean, she was a 4.5-year-old. She was crying all the time. The temper tantrums for anything. She needed to do things only in her way. So the staff will always intervene and bring her to the director's office so they could console her, because she was very disruptive. This will be a nightmare for any teacher to have. This kid had a lot of difficulty with anxiety and transitions, but more problems with self-regulation, control. She needed to be controlled. She wanted to be, she was a very capable child, cognitive capable, but had very weak social skills. Things had to be done in her own way. She could not really let things go in any way. So she complained always. She had no friends. Well, you know, given the way she was, that was really hard. But she was, from the beginning, she was very willing to participate in our activities. And this is the first story she actually says. When we go to introduce the activity, we have some models. So she took from our models. She was able to actually make, you know, we use very simple models. She says, once upon a time, a sister, a brother, and a mom, and a dad, and a baby. They went for a walk and they feed the baby. So this is, you know, she was eager to participate. And the first kids that wanted to tell a story, is, you know, this based on our mother. And what was interesting about it, she used 5 characters, more than any other children who told the stories. In a way, she grasped immediately that more characters, the more characters you bring, the more you're going to bring kids on stage, okay, to act out the story. And remember, what she wanted is to have friends. Okay, you can see her second story. I'm not going to go to a lot of detail about it. This is based loosely on Powerpuff Girls, but you can see what she does here. She takes the perspective. She now introduces, the other story had 5 characters. This story has 10 characters. The characters, I have them bolded. So when you see the bolds are where the characters are. She has them at the beginning, and then, but the actions I am kind of presenting, you know, those are the reds, and you can actually see she's much more presenting the story from the director's perspective. She says, I'm gonna be Bubble. She wants to tell us what she's going to be. She's gonna tell a story. Liana would be this. Destiny is gonna be Blossom, and so on, and then tell us the kind of actions they're going to do. So she's placing much more emphasis on the characters. She realizes what the power of the story is to actually give you control of the situation. And in that classroom, I think she basically brought the entire classroom on the stage in order to act out the story. The actions, she said, are not coordinated very much. Okay. So she realizes that by incorporating, be part of the storytelling and giving a lot of characters and roles to the kids, she can integrate itself into the classroom culture. And she used these story characters as tokens of friendship and making and keeping friends. So we will hear her say, can I play with you in other parts of it? You know, you are that all in my story. So saying, if you let me, I've already, you know, I put you in my story, or you can't be in my story if you don't let me play with you. So she's negotiating. She's bringing the elements of what's happening in the story out in you know, in the classroom. So she's realizing. On the other hand, after the story that, you know, goes from the director's perspective, and it was like, and we will do this, and the actions were not incorporated, she came to realize that there is a problem when we introduce many characters without enough actions. So after, you know, we kind of like, we brought the kids up, there is not enough action. She had the temper tantrum after. She said, we didn't do it. You know, and we said, why didn't we do it? the teacher explained that if you want to actually have kids do more in the acting, you have to put more action into your storytelling. And young kids very often have more things in their head than what they're able to tell us. And this, in a way, she was able to realize what the problems are by just focusing on one side and not so much into how the narrative is to be incorporated. So you have to focus on all the different aspects. So I will show you quickly then, without trying to go through it again. I have the bolded are the characters and the actions. Look now, the red, which are the actions, is throughout the story. And this starts once upon a time, the baby was crying with her sister and her brother. So she introduces a family, the baby sister, the mommy, the daddy. And then she does this thing that they go to Dorney Park, Disney World, and they see this and they see that, and they see all these other characters. So she's able to bring characters using, an element of the story and that creates some kind of coherence. So this is much more coherent story than the previous one that we saw. And her last story, which I would say is even more, this is a retelling of the Little Riding Hood. And she says, once upon a time was a little girl. The little girl was going to her grandma's, but her grandma was so sick. But the little girl, she walked in the woods and picked up flowers. And then the wolf jumped out the bushes and he said, what are you doing in the woods by yourself? And then he said, those are some yummy treats I smell. Then the little girl said, oh, no, I'm far away in the woods. Then the wolf said, that's okay, I'll help you. And he took her back to home. And then the wolf ate the grandma, and then he had a big fat bear. Okay, this is, a much more kind of, okay. So we saw the narrative development of the child, and here what I have is her scores on every kind of element. You can see the total score of the narrative from 12 at the pre-test, improves by 35 the post-test. She improves in every component, not only on the oral language skills and emergent literacy, but also in self-regulation skills. She was able to now inhibit herself. You can actually see from 1, we score goes to 9. In terms of disruption means you are not disrupting, so we want it to go down. Disconnection, and you actually see shifts in pro-social. So these kids began to actually help other kids in the classroom. So you can actually see how CA was able to not only improve her narrative, but also create her self-regulation skills and okay. So I hope I have managed to show you that by the storytelling, story acting allows the children to create for themselves a powerful context to promote cognitive, language, socio-emotional competence. They were not told to do that. They were not told how to tell a story, how to, that you do in other parts of the classroom, but they are able to learn how to use the rules that they learn in order to become part of this valued activity, okay? But of course, let's all remember, this is always happening in the context of supporting adults, that you are helping them create the activity. You don't intervene, but you are trusting adults and supporting adults, okay? And by doing that, you can create, they create this kind of activity that they're motivated to participate and learn from each other. And I think when we want to think about interventions, I think those are some of the elements that will be important to incorporate play and narrative activities. It should be a social activity. Kids learn from peers, adults, and the culture. It should have a component that goes above and beyond the everyday, an imaginary component, the creation of the story world that gives them the opportunities to go beyond what they hear in the here and now. And it should be able to actually allow them to enter the activity voluntarily and take the rules. You cannot just impose them. You have to create activities that they want to do. Okay, I think when we do that, we can actually achieve a lot more. So thanks for your attention. Thanks everyone, and I can stop sharing the screen.
Σε ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Σε πρόλαβα, Λέξη.
Ναι, ήμουν... Όχι μόνο πολύ ενδιαφέρον, αλλά και πάρα πολύ ζωντανό και πάρα πολύ χειροπιαστό με τα παραδείγματα. Πραγματικά.
Νομίζω ότι μας παρουσίασε έτσι μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα προσέγγιση της αφηγηματικής ικανότητας των παιδιών μέσα στο πλαίσιο της καθημερινής τους πρακτικής, της ομάδας, της τάξης, της κουλτούρας τους. Και νομίζω ότι αυτό που εμένα τουλάχιστον μου άρεσε πολύ είναι ότι υπάρχει πολλές φορές αυτή η έντονη πεποίθηση ότι τα παιδιά της προσχολικής ηλικίας δεν μπορούν να κάνουν και πολλά πράγματα. Περιγράφουν μόνο απλά γεγονότα, ενώ εδώ είδαμε ότι αν δούμε αυτή τη δράση την αφηγηματική μέσα σε ένα άλλο πλαίσιο, μπορούμε να τους δώσουμε την ευκαιρία να ενισχυθεί αυτή η ικανότητα και να δούμε πολύ περισσότερα πράγματα, και νομίζω ότι μας έβαλε σε πολλούς προβληματισμούς. Οπότε νομίζω ότι ίσως είναι καλύτερα να δώσουμε το χρόνο στο ακροατήριο να θέσει τα δικά του ερωτήματα, να συζητήσει τις δικές του σκέψεις. Άρα περιμένουμε από εσάς να θέσετε τα δικά σας στοιχεία.
Να πάρω το λόγο. Καταρχήν να συμφωνήσουμε και αν το sound awareness είναι η φωνολογική ενημερότητα, εάν το rhyming awareness είναι η ρέουσα ανάγνωση που μετά τη φωνολογική ενημερότητα πρέπει να επιτευχθεί για να μπει το παιδί στο literacy, και το print awareness είναι το storytelling, που στην προσχολική ηλικία είναι το προαναγνωστικό στάδιο 0. Δηλαδή το παιδί ακούει, δεν διαβάζει, και μάλιστα την ιστορία πιστεύει ότι τη λένε οι εικόνες και όχι αυτά τα μικρά μαύρα σημαδάκια που είναι τα γράμματα. Νομίζω ότι αυτή είναι μια βάση που πρέπει να ξεκινήσουμε. Μετά θέλω να ρωτήσω την κυρία Νικολοπούλου. Το voluntary acceptance of rules δεν μας οδηγεί στο game έναντι του play?
Okay, 2 points, I guess. Let me talk about print and word awareness, okay? What that measures is actually whether you look at a book and say, what's the beginning, where is the text, where are the pictures? So in a way, these kids got a lot of those that's one of the elements that we were able to show. Because you are writing down the story, and the child dictates the story, and the teacher writes it down next to them. I saw that. I did not show that a lot. It was just at the beginning. The kids became interested, and they say, because we would tell them back, okay, you write the brother and the sister says, what does this say? And you say, that says, and they got interested in the writing as well, right? And that's the aspect that also make it interesting. And they would actually, that's why we were able to actually see some of the developments and the print and word awareness. So writing was part of it, and as a telling, okay? With respect to your second question, that was Vygotsky's point, that in a way, or whether we're talking in terms of games with rules or contemplate, they are similar in both ways. So in a way, pretend play itself has rules, that in order for me to play, to become, these characters they have to do, there are only certain activities that go on to make it. There are more implicit rules, which you have to abstract in a way, okay? So, that in that way, so it doesn't, but when we talk of play, and that's what is significance for him, we should not talk of free play. It's not everything goes in a way. That's why I called it as a structured play activity. Okay, so you're right. It's not any kind of play, and that's why we cannot alternate. I would say play with just and structured activities. But the activities that I think we can help the kids is create playful activities that they have a lot of the play element, that they want to do it, that they all want to play. as I say, a lot of our kids, I mean, we would create waiting lists for them because they wanted to tell stories. So, because we could not take more than 3 or 4 stories for the kids, because you have to act them out the same day, there would be a waiting list. So next time you come in, take it, So we need to be thinking about how to integrate those elements. Yes.
Thank you.
Υπήρχε ένα χέρι... κυρία Βοσνιάδου. Δεν σας ακούμε. Τώρα.
Μ' ακούτε τώρα?
Ναι, φυσικά.
Ναι, σας ευχαριστούμε για μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλία. Θα πω στα αγγλικά μερικά πράγματα, μια και ήταν στα αγγλικά. Βρήκα πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα και την ομιλία και τα αποτελέσματα φυσικά της παρέμβασης που κάνατε, αλλά both Piaget and Vygotsky have talked about play in the context of cognitive development, language development, and maybe even social development. But I don't think they have talked about self-regulation and inhibition. Mm-hmm. How did you connect your activity and your intervention? Why did you expect changes in self-control, self-regulation? Yeah. How did this idea come from, and how do you explain the finding that indeed it does produce, especially the inhibition part of self-regulation? I would like to know more about the connection between those two.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think, as you say, and that both, and in the way, and the way I explain play, that I don't see Vygotsky and Piaget are together, because the ideas that Vygotsky presents comes from moral development of the child. What we actually noticed, and that's why the inhibition came in, we realized, and I think kind of like I just touched on with this child, one of the things in particular with this, that kids have to learn is that there are specific ways you do things. So for example, there is the storytelling part. So the kids, the younger kids, when they see the storytelling part, they never will come to us, okay, to tell the stories. They will actually think, so when there was the story acting, particularly this child at the beginning used to cry all the time. Just, I want to tell a story. And we say, well, you have to happen. It happens earlier in the day. And not, that you kind of need to do it earlier, and then the story acting happens. In the same way, telling the characters. So the activity itself has self-regulation elements that when we were trying to look at it, we actually thought would be important. So it's not theoretically, I agree with you, but it was by looking at the activity and seeing how much we actually had to help the kids learn when things happen and when, and to self-regulate themselves in that way.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Νομίζω ότι υπήρχε ένα χέρι πριν, αλλά δεν πρόλαβα να συγκρατήσω.
Ελένη Βαλντιμτσί, αν το λέω σωστά.
Σωστά. Hi.
Hi, Eleni.
Great talk, thanks. Hi. Professor Nicolopoulou is my mentor, so I'm biased. My comment is biased. I had this question in terms of teacher preparation. How much time did you have to train? You used to train the teachers to facilitate this intervention.
Okay, that's a good question. What we did in this classroom, we actually brought the teachers first before we started the activity. I think we did 2 hours intervention. We presented videos. We told them, and we were in the classroom with them because this was an evaluation activity. We were interested in evaluating. So my research assistants, I did not go, not to change things in a way, but my research assistants were there. We were taking, and we would help the teachers. The first year when we did the activity, they were not and that I can say afterwards, you know, there are some limitations, and I can tell you some of the limitations they are with the activity. While it's powerful, you know, teachers needed help in order to take the stories down. So for us to be able to do it twice a week, I had one of the RAs was always going there. She took the stories down and the teacher brought them up. Okay. In Vivian Paley's classroom or in other classrooms, teacher does it themselves, because I've also looked at, you know. So we trained them at the beginning and we continue to train them throughout. Okay, that's in order to be able. But we created videos for them. We created a whole set of what they could do, you know, in different situations. For example, if the child says one word story, what do you do? You know, because we don't intervene so much, is because what the kids are actually seeing. So it requires also what I noticed as well. Some teachers were very interested in kids telling stories, but they couldn't understand the significance of what it means to actually tell stories. So we needed to give them kind of, you know, help them understand the significance of telling stories. And what is a story? So for example, in one classroom that the teacher was very enthusiastic to do it, says, oh, you know, and then when he took the stories down, he said, the stories were so short, you know, where are their creative abilities? So we don't realize, you know, teachers don't realize that the kids take time to tell a story. You know, sometimes we actually, as I said, other teachers would actually tell me, oh, if you do this activity, they will all tell the same story. So you have to actually, I think there's work that needs to be done, you know, and that's a good question. Yeah.
Νομίζω η Ασημίνα Ιράλη έχει σηκώσει μετά το χέρι της.
Ναι, ευχαριστούμε πολύ κυρία Νικολοπούλου. Είμαι πολύ ενθουσιασμένη με την ομιλία σας, την απίλαυσα πάρα πολύ, γιατί πιστεύω και εγώ στην δύναμη της αφήγησης και στο πώς αυτή βοηθάει, όλα αυτά που μας δείξατε ότι βοηθάει. Θα μιλήσω και εγώ λίγο στα αγγλικά για κάποια σημεία. I just wanted to add that I liked your comment that narratives can be used as a school readiness school to promote the school readiness of children from difficult environments. I have two methodological questions regarding the way you implemented the intervention. The narratives were free narratives, or did you use an opening sentence like, one day Mary and George went there, and then they had to carry on the story, or they were just narrate whatever they wanted to narrate? This is my first question. The second question has to do with acting out the story. As I saw in the video, in the first phase, the teacher narrated the story, and then the children took roles and acted out the roles without talking. My question is, was there the case that the children acted out the role while talking? And I have, like, saying the words of the actor. And I have this question in mind because in your results, you showed us that there was no improvement in expressive vocabulary. And in the case this didn't happen, what I just said before, maybe this is a reason. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the way we introduce, I mean, yes, let me go to your first question. The way we introduce the activity, we want the kids to tell their own story. We don't give them anything. We want them to actually create their own stories. But the way we introduce it, we go into the classroom. The first day, I was the one doing that. I actually created the states. So making them see that there is a state, giving them the ideas that when you are acting the story, you go in the state. When you are telling the story, you know, will be outside the state. So giving them the ideas of the acting aspect. And then I introduced different examples, simple examples. so that they could kind of get a feeling. So I introduced an example, then I asked different kids to come in, you know, they always raise their hand and they would act out, I read, and then they will act it out. So that's the way we introduce the activity. That's what Paley did herself, so I followed that kind of method. But then when the activity goes on, you ask the child, he says, do you have a story? And you wait, okay? You don't say, once upon a time or anything, you wait for them to tell a story. If they don't have much, you know, if they start and say, anything else? Do you have anything else in your story? Is this the end? Those kind of, use minimal interventions for that. The activity, as you say, has been used in different ways, but that's the way I used it, okay? With respect to, with respect to the acting out, the way we did it in order, you know, what I saw you was from the Philadelphia preschools, Head Start, that they had incorporated the activity and they made special videos. You can say there was even music. I cannot do that. Okay. And what actually happens is after we took out the stories for intervention, we asked the kids at that moment to tell who would want to be in their story. We had to help the kids. If you notice, I mean, and you know, that's the difficult part. The teacher must do a lot and must be a good teacher in order to control the kids when we are reading the story, getting what they are talking. So we did it by asking the kids, whom do you want to be in the story? And then we say, you know, let's say Maria selected you to be in the story to do that. Do you want to do that? Okay, so we asked the child, you know, when they were selected. With respect to having them express the narratives, I don't think they're able yet because they're actions. I mean, I show you that the kid who would, the last story of Destiny, that was the first time we introduced dialogue. Dialogue comes later in their stories, and it would be very hard to try to get them, all the kids, to be of the abilities to be able to tell. However, I would say the explanation I give why our PVT scores did not really improve as much was because in that classroom, there was not a lot of book reading activities. In fact, there were none. So although they, you know, that sometimes we would be there, we might read the book to the child. And I think, and that's how Paley also did it, is you read books as well. You have them act out as well as acting their own stories. So I think that's why I would say they are expressive vocabulary. When you say, you know, people have done it with first graders who are more capable of acting out their roles. They're more capable of doing that. So that's one way that, yes, acting out, telling their stories would be an important component. Yes.
Thank you.
Αν δεν υπάρχει κάτι άλλο, μπορώ να πάρω το λόγο. Εγώ δεν ξέρω αν είναι ερώτηση, μάλλον περισσότερο σχόλιο είναι και μια σκέψη που έκανα ακούγοντας την ιστορία, το case study της Destiny. Συνειδητοποίησα ότι πιθανόν μέσω της δραστηριότητας αυτής τα παιδιά αφηγούνται την ιστορία που μετά πρέπει να δραματοποιήσουν. Ενώ σε ένα αφήγημα παιδιών το μεγάλο βάρος συνήθως πέφτει στο παρελθόν. Και γι' αυτό εξάλλου ζητάμε και παρελθοντικούς χρόνους. Στην πραγματικότητα πρόκειται για έναν τρόπο οργάνωσης μιας προηγούμενης of a past experience. Τα παιδιά εδώ, εκτός από κίνητρο που τους δημιουργήθηκε με την προσμονή του play, του act out, επηρέασε και τη δομή των ιστοριών. Δηλαδή βλέπουμε οι ιστορίες ότι έχουν στοιχεία από past experiences, γιατί βλέπουμε το Winnie the Pooh, βλέπουμε διάφορους χαρακτήρες από ιστορίες που έχουν ακούσει στο παρελθόν ή τις εμπειρίες τους. Αλλά βλέπουμε αυτές τις ιστορίες να επηρεάζονται, να γίνονται λίγο future-oriented, τα παιδιά να φαντάζονται πώς θέλουν να είναι το θέατρο που θα παίξουν, και ανάλογα να διαμορφώνουν και τις ιστορίες. Οπότε, σκέφτομαι φωναχτά τώρα λίγο, αυτό γνωστικά πρέπει να έχει διαφορετικό φόρτο από μία απλή αφήγηση μίας ιστορίας που κάνει αναφορά στο παρελθόν. Εδώ μπαίνει και μία projection into the future.
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yes, in a way, we are demanding a lot of the kids. Let's put it like that. It's not a simple activity in a way, while it seems simple, and you can actually see, she takes it in the directors and she gives us the characters and then tells us what they are going to do. But as it goes on, she's able to step back. Yeah, when we tell stories, we also have to think what we want to do. The audience, what they have to do is they have to tell stories that are interesting to the rest of the kids, that they want to play with them, okay? Because if there's not an interesting story, I mean, the kids, if they don't have actions, they don't want to be the story. They say, you didn't give me, they will get upset and they will tell each other. And that was the interesting thing. It says, you didn't give me any action. You didn't give me anything to do. So next time they have to actually make it interesting. So what you are saying about we're telling a story about the past is not only telling the personal experience, but we have to look at the future, we have to plan. That's why, narrative requires a lot of different things.
What I mean is usually we ask children to tell a story, and they do the job, and then it just ends the task. Here they had to imagine how this story will impact the activity. And that's very beautiful. That's very, very creative.
That's where the self-regulation comes in as well. Knowing also, waiting for your turn and all these different elements.
Okay.
Ωραία. Η διακονιώτη Κλεοπάτρα.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, κυρία Νικολοπούλου, για την εξαιρετική ομιλία. Μία ερώτηση ήθελα να κάνω. Βλέποντας αυτά τα δεδομένα, τα αποτελέσματα της έρευνας που μας παρουσιάσατε, τι θα γινόταν αν είχαμε μεγαλύτερα παιδιά? Δηλαδή, τι αποτελέσματα θα περιμένατε σε παιδιά ίσως των πρώτων 3 τάξεων του δημοτικού σχολείου? Και να πω και ένα δεύτερο, το οποίο έχει πιο πρακτική, έτσι, να ρωτήσω κάτι που θέλω τη γνώμη σας πάνω σε αυτό, που έχει μια πιο πρακτική διάσταση. Πόσο σημαντικό θα ήταν τέτοιου είδους δραστηριότητες και παρεμβάσεις να γίνονται στο δημοτικό σχολείο? Δεν ξέρω πώς είναι το αμερικάνικο σχολείο, αλλά το ελληνικό, ξέρετε, με το που μπαίνει το παιδί στην πρώτη δημοτικού, όλα γίνονται πια πολύ σοβαρά ή πολύ σοβαροφανή. Σταματάνε και τα παιχνίδια και τα τραγούδια και όλα, και αρχίζουν τα παιδιά να μαθαίνουν γλώσσα. Το παιχνίδι είναι κάτι περιθωριακό. Και αναρωτιόμουν πόσο θα μπορούσαμε να συμβουλεύσουμε δασκάλους, ειδικά άτομα σαν και εμένα που δουλεύουμε, εκπαιδεύουμε δασκάλους, να χρησιμοποιούν το παιχνίδι και για την καλλιέργεια του προφορικού λόγου. Γιατί να τονίσω εδώ πέρα ότι όταν το παιδί μπει στο δημοτικό σχολείο, πια ο προφορικός λόγος θεωρείται δεδομένος. Είναι σαν να τελείωσε όλη αυτή η εκπαίδευση. Πραγματικά. Θεωρείται ότι αυτό το έχει το παιδί, για να χρησιμοποιήσω μια έκφραση πολύ ελληνική και καινούργια, ας πούμε, ότι ο προφορικός λόγος είναι κατακτημένος και δουλεύουμε πάνω στο γραπτό, αποκλειστικά. Εγώ λοιπόν σκέφτομαι πώς θα μπορούσε αυτό να γίνει μια πρακτική στο ελληνικό σχολείο. Επομένως, τέτοιου είδους δραστηριότητες να εισαχθούν με ένα συστηματικό τρόπο στο δημοτικό σχολείο, και τι είδους σχέση θα μπορούσε να έχει όλες οι δραστηριότητες τι είδους σχέση θα μπορούσε να υπάρχει ανάμεσα στην καλλιέργεια του προφορικού λόγου μέσα από αυτές τις δραστηριότητες και στην καλλιέργεια του γραπτού, που υποτίθεται ότι είναι το main focus, ας πούμε, της εκπαίδευσης στο δημοτικό σχολείο. Άρα πώς θα μπορούσαν να συνδεθούν καλύτερα ο προφορικός, η ανάπτυξη του προφορικού λόγου και η ανάπτυξη του γραπτού λόγου, και να μην ξεχάσω και την ανάπτυξη αυτών των κοινωνικο-συναισθηματικών δεξιοτήτων, ικανοτήτων, που και αυτές είναι ένα ζητούμενο. Δεν είναι δηλαδή ότι έχει λήξει το θέμα στο νηπιαγωγείο. Έχουμε μεγάλα ζητήματα τέτοια και στο δημοτικό, για να μην πω μεγαλύτερα. Ευχαριστώ.
Very good questions. Okay. We have the same things happen in the US. I had a hard time even trying. I mean, I think you can take this activity with older kids, and I totally agree that you can't focus on the writing without focusing on telling. The two go together. You know, you hear also from authors, they say, if you want to become a good writer, you have to read the way, you know, and the two go together. So I totally agree with you. And I totally agree that it would be important to actually incorporate this activity earlier on. There is some very nice work. One of the elements that as kids get older, and I think between first and second grade might be still okay, they might not want to act out the story. So they would do what is called author chair, which is quite an activity. The child writes a story and brings their friends. And I think if we could do that, it would be wonderful. I could not do this activity in kindergartners in the US because they have their curriculum. They would not allow me to do this activity, okay? I could do them with 4-year-olds. But what's important also for us to realize, and that's the research is showing us, we have to intervene also early, because the kids from low-income backgrounds, if we don't intervene early on for them to be able to tell, we get all these reading disabilities later on. And we try to intervene later on, and in a way we have lost a lot of ground. So I totally agree with you. It's like, I mean, after a while, you know, this study was done. It was a skill study. The next step, and I have gotten funding from the federal government, the next step was me to go and do, you know, 25 classrooms. I mean, I couldn't do that because they wouldn't. I mean, as I was telling when Eleni asked questions, there is a lot of work you have to do for people to realize even the significance of the narrative, how hard it is to tell a story, that it is not simply, because, you know, that we go in a classroom, and I went to several classrooms to introduce the activity, because yeah, kids are really, you know, it's nice to tell a story, but I realized I had to do actually a seminar on what narrative is and why we have the ability. So, yeah. If you can do that, if I can help you do that, I'd be more than happy.
Okay, thank you in advance. Thank you.
Αν δεν υπάρχει κάποιος άλλος, θέλω και εγώ λίγο κάτι να ρωτήσω. Γιατί σκεφτόμουν όλα αυτά που υπόθηκαν και σε σχέση με το είδος της γνωστικής επιλογής που μπορούμε να δούμε σε αυτή τη δράση. Και αυτό που είδαν, νομίζω υπόθηκε και στην αρχή, ότι αυτές οι παρεμβάσεις είναι constructivistικές και όντως το παιδί σε ανατομικό επίπεδο αποδίδει ένα νόημα στην εμπειρία του, φέρνει τη δική του εμπειρία, κατασκευάζει την ιστορία σε αυτή την πρώτη φάση. Σκεφτόμουν μετά πόσο ενδιαφέρον έχει να δούμε αυτούς τους μετασχηματισμούς της ιστορίας όταν πια πρέπει να την παίξουν την ιστορία, να την κάνουν πράξη. Και σκεφτόμουν επίσης πόσο σημαντικό εκεί είναι να δούμε και τις αλληλεπιδράσεις στην ομάδα. Δηλαδή πώς κάποιο άλλο παιδί θα μπορούσε εκείνη τη στιγμή να πει στο 4χρονο κορίτσι που είδε ότι έχει πολλούς ήρωες αλλά πολύ λίγες δράσεις για αυτούς τους ήρωες, ότι αν δεν φτάνουν μήπως πρέπει να το ξανασκεφτείς. Δηλαδή, καθώς αυξάνεται και αυτός ο βαθμός αφηγηματικής πολυπλοκότητας, αν παίζει ρόλο και αυτή η αλληλεπίδραση στα παιδιά, και αν είδατε τέτοιους μετασχηματισμούς, όχι μόνο σε ατομικό επίπεδο, αλλά και μέσα από τις συναλλαγές με την ομάδα που γίνονται εκείνη τη στιγμή.
With the young kids, that was a little bit harder, but the author chair, what used to do, was done with, I think, with a third grade classroom. The other kids afterwards, they say what they liked of the story, what was good, what was not good. For these kids, they began to realize for themselves in the acting out the limitations of their stories. Because I don't want to be in your story if you don't give me anything. I saw it that. What I saw also, and I have analyzed, is the creation of the common culture. That, that what I was interested in, and the teacher who first gave, incorporated this activity in their classroom and asked me to analyze the story, she told me immediately, by introducing the story, the kids were actually learning to play with one another more, to be able to be together. And we were interested in the creation of common culture. So I kind of follow how they come to actually create this common culture. You can actually see that, I show you a story of Power Rangers. That was a classroom. There were the Power Rangers that actually, the kids will tell this kind of stories. One of them introduced it as a character, and over time, it became much more part of them. So I think with the young kids, they learn to listen to each other. They learn to actually incorporate. The first thing they would do is just take a character, but no actions, okay? They would actually incorporate, but nothing else. Over time, they're beginning. And that's why I think the activity is good to be integrated with models, not at the time that they tell the story, but in the, that you can have books that they can act out, that they can see the models. And with the younger kids, you do that more implicitly, and they pick up the ideas. With older kids, you can be more explicit, as you say, and the other kids, talking to each other. I think that's an important component. I think in interventions, we need to incorporate the social component and the other kids.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Ωραία. Υπάρχει κάποια άλλη ερώτηση, σχόλιο? Οπότε θα το κλείσουμε νομίζω εδώ. Κυρία Νικολοπούλου, ήταν μεγάλη χαρά και τιμή μας που ήσασταν εδώ σήμερα. Παρουσιάσατε όλα αυτά τα ενδιαφέροντα. Νομίζω θα μπορούσαμε να συζητάμε για πάρα πολλή ώρα ακόμα. Πραγματικά για πάρα πολύ. Αλλά επειδή έχει περάσει και η ώρα θα το κλείσουμε εδώ. Να είστε όλοι καλά. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που συνδεθήκατε σήμερα για τα πολύ όμορφα σχόλια και ερωτήσεις. Κυρία Νικολοπούλου, είστε επανειδήν και ευχαριστούμε πολύ πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ.
Thank you very much for all your wonderful questions, okay? And if I can help you in incorporate this activity, I'll be more than happy.
Θα το θέλαμε πολύ.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.
Σας ευχαριστούμε όλους που ήσασταν εδώ. Καλό βράδυ να έχετε.
Καλό βράδυ, να είστε καλά.